Welcome to the Georgia Podcast, featuring the who's who and what's new in Georgia. Made possible in part by Global Podcast Studios, offering podcast studio rentals, production, and distribution. Visit globalpodcaststudios.com. And by our friends at Serendipity Labs, co-working, private offices, and more. True inspiration at work. Learn more at serendipitylabs.com. Now join Rich Casanova, broadcasting live from the Pro Business Channel studios in Atlanta and worldwide across the PBC syndicated networks.
All right. We got a great one in the studio today here. The rock star, the man, the myth, the legend, whatever. Mark Deal is in our podcast studios. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Rich. You built me up so you can knock me down. Is that what it is there?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, we can arm wrestle a little bit later, but let's go ahead and jump into the podcast.
Arm wrestle with the Casanova.
Yeah, and they'll never know who wins because we've got no evidence to prove it. Yeah,
just paint it. Whoever's
it's
listening,
my word against yours.
Paint it in your mind.
And guess whose studio we're in? Yeah. So let's skip the arm wrestling then. Yeah, I'm going to claim victory on that right up front. So for those folks that you may not know, if you've been in Atlanta for any period of time in the podcasting world or outside of Atlanta, you may have run across this dude and all of his tools in his sandboxes we were mentioning earlier in the podcast space. So, Mark, we got a lot of ground to cover today. We're going to be talking about your PodATL, that meetup group that's just gone huge. Some of the numbers that's achieved. We were just fresh back from Podcast Movement in Orlando, the world's largest event, according to those guys.
And everybody,
right? Yeah. We're going to hit a couple of events. Speaking of Orlando, we'll be back in Orlando in March 2020 for PodFest. But what's really cool is we got the She Podcast, their first ever, I think, live event, right? Coming to our hometown.
Oh, yeah.
In Atlanta. And then we're going to hit people up with the Podcast Guest Academy and what's cooking over there. So give us a little teaser before we jump into all those other topics. The Podcast Guest Academy, your best 17 seconds or less. Go.
17 seconds or less. So Podcast Guest Academy is a tool that I've built with some other people to show individuals that are experts how to find the best podcast for their message, how to reach out to those hosts in a way that actually gets them booked, how to perform those interviews well. And Rich, you know that's key as a host. And then how to leverage those interviews for their own book, brand, or business.
Yeah, I think I've attended the junior academy, but yeah, I'm going to catch up with you one day. All right, so call to action. How would people find you online? The podcast, what's your best way to
podcastguestacademy.com. Podcastguestacademy.com. Thank you for that. The whole URL there. Right. You can head to the homepage and find out everything that we're doing there. But, something special for listeners of this show, if you head on over to podcastguestacademy.com/PBC, for Pro Business Channel. Exactly.
Sweet.
We're doing something a little special. Normally we offer lifetime memberships, but we're offering an easy in and easy out if you want to. A couple clicks of your mouse, a monthly membership.
Sweet. So PBC fans, you just got hooked up with a sweet deal, whatever. Yeah, you're not going to find that anywhere else. Yeah,
don't write this in the show notes. This is for the person that's listening to this now.
Sweet, yeah. Not for the slackers, yeah.
Exactly. You go to the show notes, you're going to get the homepage, but follow that /PBC and you'll see what we're talking about.
Love it. And we love the PBC. Shout out to Pro Business Channel. So we're on the Georgia Podcast. We're here in Georgia. And again, we're talking to Mark Deal. Now we mentioned a little teaser for the Podcast Guest Academy. But early on, actually, we can go back as far as original studio at the Lennox Center. Your wife was in on our Atlanta Legal Experts talking about immigration law. And
that's right.
Who knew? Fast forward a few, you knew. Yeah.
I know all the people, all the players, but yeah.
All right, so fast forward from there. Talk to us about the Podcast Atlanta, which is a meetup group. You have your own website, podatlanta.com. The origins, and give us that before and after and current story.
Sure. So the meetup group is Podcast Atlanta. Our website is actually PodATL.com.
Right.
Just 6 letters, which makes for a super simple email. If somebody listening wants to email me, it's a simple Mark with a K at PodATL.com. And so for Podcast Atlanta, what we do there is we offer venues and events for podcasters to get together, to know each other, to network, to mingle, as well as to learn. So historically, we've done a rotating bi-monthly format where we do a formal event where somebody gets up and talks and teaches, maybe a panel, and then next month we do more of a social mixer. And that's what we've done for the last 3 years or so. We're the world's fastest growing local podcast meetup.
Wow.
We're the largest the second largest in the U.S. Number one is the Florida Podcasters Association, and they've been doing it for over 10 years, and they're all of Florida. We've been doing it solely in Metro Atlanta for 3 years, and we're only 200 members behind that. We're over 100 members. Oh,
no,
sorry, 1,000.
You tapped over 1,000.
Yeah. Let's add on another zero.
We'll insert the applause right here. Pause for the applause. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, and it certainly puts you on the map in that space and helps kind of springboard yourself, your brand, and other people in the, especially locally, which is where, it's interesting because podcasts, as we know, can reach around the world. But there's something about the face-to-face and connecting, in person. I mean, I was kind of bummed for when I first heard about it. I wanted to attend so many times, but there was always a conflict in the calendar. And finally, I was able to attend. And
we're glad you did.
Yeah. And then after attending, I was actually invited and honored and pleased to be part of a panel at the only Pod Atlanta event that you didn't attend. I was like I said before, I felt a little offended, but you reassured me it wasn't personal, right?
Exactly. Just to open the door for the person listening, what happened is, I've been running Podcast Atlanta for over 3 years, and it can be tiring. It can be exhausting. Doing all the events, doing a lot of the speaking, finding the speakers, everything. And basically, I had an event slot. We had speakers lined up, such as yourself.
Right.
We had a venue, and I wanted to give it to my co-organizers and say, hey, you run it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to hear the feedback on how it went without me being there.
They did a phenomenal job, yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Because sometimes you
not
being
just
there,
because I was there, yeah.
Well, of course. But, sometimes you being there can influence the results, and I wanted to step out and see, will this succeed without me being there?
100%.
Yeah, and it turns out it did. Because we had you there, Rich Casanova.
Okay, enough about me, yeah. So your official count now is actually 1,056 people. So, and I'm sure you'll get a few more people as a result of this podcast. So before we move on to our next topic, speaking of podcast movement, so at your most recent event here in Atlanta, you actually had the other myth, the other man, the other legend, Jared Easley was in Atlanta promoting the podcast movement. It was at your event, and you were there, by the way, as well.
It was. Jared Easley and I go way back. In fact, he was invited to speak in Nashville. So the first thing he did, he called me up. He said, Atlanta's 4 hours away. Let's do something together. And I said, sure, let's do it. And you were at that event. We had about 90 people.
Oh, it was awesome, yeah.
Yeah, we did it at a brewery outside for about 3 hours. And that way they could get together and do a social mixer, but also Jared could talk a little bit about podcast movement as well as, raise awareness, because they've been doing this for 6 years. We just finished the 6th annual podcast movement, but Orlando is the closest it's ever been
100%.
To Atlanta. Yeah, next year it's in
Dallas and Philly, and Yeah,
and next year it's in Dallas as well. It was Philly the year before last. But this is the closest it's been. It's, as you said at the top of the show, it's the largest podcasting conference, and I wanted as many Podcast Atlanta people to be there and represent, and a few showed up.
Yeah, no, I saw a few people that were there that I knew, and I think got their ticket that night, and I saw them at the event, and we did a road trip down there as well. Okay, so let's jump into your takeaways, observations from that 4-day event. A little overwhelming, 3,000 people, probably 180 or 60 exhibitors.
It was huge. It was huge. It gets bigger and bigger every year. And this year seemed like a step increase over last year in Philly, which also seemed like a step increase in the year before that. I think that was in Anaheim.
Yeah. But they're at their tipping point where Jared and Dan have said that they're not in a position, the next iteration is going to be at a convention center, and there's a million other moving parts, so they're at a challenge, but let's kind of roll through rapid fire questions here. So, as an attendee, before we get to the speakers and so forth, networking. Talk to us about, did you connect with some people that you?
I've connected with a lot of people, both familiar faces, old friends that I see maybe once or twice a year, and new people. And I'll be honest, Rich, that's one of the reasons why I go. I sat in maybe 2 or 3 sessions because I got the virtual ticket. There's a lot of times there's concurrent sessions happening.
I know, right?
That I want to go to this and this. Right. Sometimes I may go to one. The other ones I'll just, I'll step back. There's a virtual ticket. I'll watch it. I'll go into the session if I have a question on that topic for the speaker. Otherwise, it's all about the networking in the exhibit hall, in the hallways, in the venue itself, meeting new people, seeing old friends, working on collaborations. Which is a lot of how my projects got started, is seeing people in in person that we've known each other for years and say, hey, what do you think about this idea?
Yeah.
Some fly, some don't.
Right. I like you saying that because I felt a little odd that I really didn't attend too many sessions either, or whatever, but you get the virtual ticket. And I found myself just engrossed in conversations at not just in the hall, but there was other pop-up, sponsors and exhibitors and so forth, and just the attendees and the networking event. The first night, what's his name was there? Podcast Paradise or
John Lee Dumas?
John Lee Dumas was there. It was just, the social, the networking. Did you go to all the parties or some of the parties? Or
Actually, I did not. I ended up getting sick this conference. I still have a little
why
bit
did you do that?
Why did I do that? Yeah, because I did it on purpose. Of course, Rich. So I went to the first one.
Yeah.
The second one, I was starting to feel a little under the weather.
Yeah.
The last one, the biggest part of the year,
Right, yeah.
I didn't go to at all. And what happens is these...
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay. So
somebody didn't turn off their phone on silent.
Yeah, that was
his
the
initials.
host.
His initials were Rich Casanova. Yeah, that's where I thought I said it. Yeah. So
I'll go
okay,
lean back and cough since obviously that was an edit point
Yeah.
there. So the largest party of the year, I think it was hosted by iHeartMedia. All these parties, open bar, multiple hours. It's a huge let down your hair. I'm bald, so that didn't take much time. But they're also incredibly loud. That's a lot of the negative feedback that you hear in podcast movement. Just the parties are huge, the beer and wine flows, but they're incredibly loud. And podcasters like to talk. So
we found ourselves migrating to the outdoor space of the venue, and it was really cool to be able to do that.
Really cool in Orlando summer
as
evening.
cool as it can be, yeah. I was born and raised, I was born in Miami, but after 13 months old, I decided to move. I was so over South Beach after a year old, but grew up in Central Florida, quite about 30 minutes from Orlando. But get there...
Or longer if you're crawling at the age of 13 months.
Exactly. But what I was going to say, I go back there usually during the holidays like Christmas, but not during the summer, and it threw me off. The humidity was insane, Right. So let's talk, before we move on to the next topic, about the sponsors and exhibitors. Any booths? Because there were some obviously big players in there, right? So you had Google with a massive presence talking about not just their Google podcast, but the idea that now you can enter podcast, fill in the blank your subject matter, and we were pretty excited at the booth. I literally went to their booth, and on their device, we typed in Podcast Pro Business. Didn't put our brand channel in there. Right. Pro Business channel was all over the front page because that's a vernacular, just Pro Business. And yet, because of the Google and everything we were doing, but Google, and then talk to us about the not Podbean, Spotify booth and their announcement.
Yeah, so Spotify, it used to be hard to get on Spotify. You used to have to be selected. You had to be in the top tier of podcasting. They need content. Everyone needs content. So now they've opened it up, made the submission process much easier, and they've doubled down. They had that huge booth, as you saw. I think it took like the space of 4 normal booths. It was 2 stories.
Coffee nonstop. Gourmet.
They had rugs and couches and everything.
And T-shirts.
T-shirts, of course, T-shirts. Everyone has T-shirts. But they're really trying to bring the podcasters in and say, hey, put your shows on our platform, because it turns out that the riches in the niches, as my friend Pat says. Yeah. And so they want as many shows as possible on their platform.
But their big announcement to me was that now, like Google did, Google had Google Play Music, and then you had Apple Music, right, or iTunes.
Which is going away, iTunes.
Exactly, October. So now it's Apple Podcasts and Apple Music. Same thing. But Google, believe it or not, took the lead on that, because it was Google Music, Google Play Music. They created about 8 months ago, Google Podcast as a dedicated platform. Spotify has now done the same thing. They have a dedicated platform just called Google for podcasting, and I went in there, uploaded our content, all the good stuff, independent of the music platform.
Well, they have to. Now that they're inviting everybody, they have to basically carve it off and section it off, category it off, and say, hey, this is where you go for podcast.
Okay. So we're going to move on in a second to another Orlando event. Before we do, one last look up here at the sponsors or the exhibitors. Any brands that kind of jumped off your page that Himalaya had a huge play. ESPN was there. That was interesting.
Yeah, ESPN was offering free ice cream. Himalaya, their parent company is actually a Chinese company. They showed up big in PodFest in March and then really brought out the show here at Podcast Movement. They've been dumping lots of money lately into the podcasting space. I think in the order, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but in the order of hundreds of million, like 200, 300 million in the last 6 months to really come out and say, Himalaya, we are the big player. And of course, they have to invest that amount of money because podcasting has grown so huge in the last few years. We have Apple, we have Google, we have Spotify. For somebody like Himalaya that, for the person listening, you may not know it, and a lot of people don't. That's why they've been dumping tons and tons of money into the platform. And to get in front of us, the creators, to say, here's who we are. This is what we do.
Right.
Come be a part of us.
Let's go alphabetical real quick. So Jack Daniels, how did I miss their booth? Whatever, right? They hosted a party, but man, if they had a booth there, I don't think anybody would have got anything done, right?
I actually know the host of that show.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now, what about Lipstick Vinyl? I think they... Do you know much about them? Or
I don't.
Okay, we'll come back to them. Nielsen, that was interesting.
Oh, yeah, Nielsen. There's been a lot of announcements from Nielsen lately. The last few years, over a decade, they've been coming out with what the stats are in internet advertising, right? Website banners, whatever. And they've been looking at podcasts and streaming radio, audiobooks, and everything for a while. They earlier this year, 2019, they decided to really dive into podcasting, and now their surveys, their reports are like $30,000 a quarter, but they produce really great statistics.
Well, they've been at it a long time, and that was kind of cool. They had a work lounge set up there. Pandora, they had charging stations, but I didn't see really presence of them. Parcast, they gave out some cool bags. I don't know much. Do you know much about that brand? Or
I don't. But if you back up Pandora, obviously they're now letting podcasts on their platform, and through a couple side conversations, Pandora has acknowledged that they're going to start doing rev share for podcasters. Now,
sounds like a scoop to me. Whatever. Yeah,
it does. Don't expect a lot of money because obviously there's some huge musicians on Pandora that's basically getting fractions and fractions of a penny on all these plays.
Exactly,
But they
Podcoin. Do you know much about them or?
No,
they're one of the new players, right?
Right.
There's so
As
many
you mentioned,
new
there's almost 200 sponsors. In the exhibit hall was bigger this year than ever. I think I spent a lot of time in the exhibit hall.
Yeah, me too.
But I didn't get a chance to go and talk to everybody. You just you walk by, you look at their booth. What are they offering? Like, that's not for me. It's not for my crowd. Not for my show.
Right. In some booth, you might spend 20 or 30 minutes having a conversation, a breakaway, or whatever. Right?
Yep, that has certainly happened to me with a few.
Let me see a couple other ones here. TalkShoe, that was interesting. We got invited. They had a cool setup. They had two. Staged events in the mezzanine area, and we were or got invited. But I did a panel there and facilitated. It had some really rock stars on there. Actually, go back to Himalaya. We had a principal from Himalaya there. We had the founder of Repurpose.io from Toronto, and another new brand from Ireland. And we got invited to attend all of their foreign country events. So stay tuned for that. So finally, we finished on maybe any of these last row. Westwood One, they had an interesting proposition. You could step into their booth, like the old booth, and we did a recording in there. Did you jump in there? Or
I didn't, but they had something similar last year. Okay. Basically, pitch your podcast idea.
We did that.
Exactly.
All right. So, final thoughts on any other brands that jump off the page? Otherwise, we're good to go, I guess.
Yeah, and this is only a small snippet of what was actually there. One of the things I like about Podcast Movement, the huge number of sponsors, but you also get a feel for where the industry is going, because if a company pops up and says, we're going to serve this piece, and then maybe two or three pop up and say, we're going to serve this portion of podcasting, it's a sign that there's obviously money in that portion of podcasting, and somebody's stepping up to serve it. So that's always kind of interesting to see.
Yeah. Speaking of sign, ABC News was there. I mean, the big players now. I'll finish on this. This is a new brand. There was probably a dozen new brands that just coming into the space. And what was the one? The Toolbox. Podcaster's Toolbox.
Podcaster's Toolbox. Yeah.
They're not launching until October.
Well, they've been in a perpetual. We're going to launch.
Stand by.
Exactly.
Stay tuned.
But they finally come out with not just a date, but the time.
Okay. Yeah. They have
down to the second. And I went and asked Ralph Rivera. I was like, "How did you come up with this?" And basically, it's a play off The Princess Bride. But it's their way to say, "Look, we're finally going to launch."
Yeah. Lipson was bigger than ever, but Bullhorn, I had never heard of that brand, and I had what was interesting in these new startup brands, typically at the booth was literally the founder or the co-founder. The person behind the brand you could talk to one-on-one. Had a really great conversation with this guy, Silicon Valley startup. We jumped on their platform right away, and it's really cool. I used to say a saying at networking events. Well, I'll mention their value proposition. So in addition to a free platform, content distribution and so forth, but what's unique is once you're on their platform, they give you a dedicated phone number that anybody can grab their phone and call in and offline listen to your podcast from your RSS feed. And so I was telling the guy there, I said, I used to say this phrase back in the day at networking events. I would just jokingly, I don't know where I came up with it, I used to say, low tech is the wave of the future. And people are like, that makes no sense, right? Makes no sense. But I used to say that low tech is the wave of the future. And that's what they really kind of brought something unique to the marketplace. Yeah. Imagine on your Bluetooth on your device, you don't have to be connected to the internet, no Wi-Fi, no data. You just and you get a dedicated line free for your podcast content from your RSS feed. The person dials a number, put on speakerphone, listen to it. It's just, I thought it was kind of interesting.
It is. I launched a show about immigration, focusing on the foreign national aspect of immigration. And I talked to these guys at Bullhorn many years ago because I was like the perfect show for that platform because people, as you said, can just dial in and listen.
Anywhere in the world, and you can be in the most remote place.
Exactly. And
from a landline.
Right.
Hello.
Sounds so archaic, but it's true.
I'll send you a fax later,
Right. And of course, you see all the silver sponsors there. All four of them are podcast hosts, so everybody wants you to go to their platform and host your own show.
No, Jared and Dan shout out to them, those guys. They're just, they really established this is the place to be. So get your tickets early. So let's move on. So that was a recap of the podcast movement. Once again, you're listening to Rich Casanova here on the Georgia Podcast, and in our studios here at Serendipity Labs in our Buckhead studio, we're having a conversation with Mark Deal. Mark Deal, quick, give us another call to action, a shout out, and how people would reach you. I guess that's a podcastacademy.com.
Sure. My website is podcastguestacademy.com, where we show people how to find the right shows for their message, how to reach out to host in a way that will actually get them booked as a guest, how to perform them well. That's key. We show a lot of tips, tricks, tactics, conversational techniques, things to do on a podcast interview so it stays lively, it stays fresh, people remember you.
Right.
And then, of course, act on those interviews. We show you how to leverage those interviews for your own book, brand, or business.
Dang. And then that helps people build their awareness, their credibility, authority, all that good stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, let's jump to two other quick events real quick. So PodFest, the Multimedia Expo with Chris and John, right?
That's right.
March 2020. Back in not Hot Atlanta, but Hot Lando. That's it. Hot Lando. That's it. Yeah, I just coined it.
Yeah, PodFest has always been in Florida. The last few years, it's been in Orlando. Before that, it was in the Tampa Bay area. But it's always in February, March. It's always in the Florida area. And in fact, I talked to Chris. It's going to be in Orlando in the foreseeable future. And in fact, this year, they're moving on to an even bigger venue. They're going to be in the Marriott World, which, how do they come up with the name Marriott World? Apparently, it's the biggest Marriott in the world. They said,
according to Chris, and Marriott. Yeah.
Well, according to and Marriott. So you would think
we don't need to fact check that one. Yeah, I think.
Well, you would think Marriott would know what they're talking about if they're going to name it Marriott property. World. Right, exactly, name their property.
Yeah.
So we'll be back there March 6th through 8th in Orlando, and the weather is much more temperate in early March than it is in
New York than
it is in August in Orlando. And what's really nice is here we are. We're in Atlanta. And March can be cold. March is one of those iffy months. You're certainly not swimming. Maybe you're wearing a jacket. Maybe you can have a T-shirt on. But in Orlando in March, you can swim in the pools at the resort. So that's nice.
So how many years have you attended?
PodFest?
Yeah,
only 2 years. Only 2 years. I got my start at the very first podcast. In fact, I started podcasting before all these conferences popped up.
Okay.
But I've been to 5 out of the 6 podcast movements. I was there at the very first one,
Really?
2014. Yeah.
In Dallas, dang.
Yeah. And I started attending.
Was there about 500 people there?
700. 700. It felt so small and intimate.
Yeah, but still for the first, they did a crowdfunding campaign, correct me if I'm wrong, raised about $38,000.
Yeah.
But they were still not.
Right. Actually, that may be foreshadowing in something we'll be talking about in 5 minutes.
Sweet.
But it's funny. I remember that, it was the first one for me. It was the first one of them. You always have fond memories of your first.
Sure.
Looking back at the pictures, the branding and the staging and all the signage was kind of mediocre compared to now. It's a multi-million-dollar conference.
Right,
There's another. Well, we're getting back on podcast, but let's move forward.
Okay, so check that out, and then you can just go to podfestexpo.com and check that out. They haven't even released the tickets or the countdown clock yet. So
they're coming soon. There's a sign-up page on that, and Chris Kremistos and John Dennis are good guys. They've been doing that. Chris he's done over 1,000 events.
What?
And he's done over 1,000 events in Florida, not for PodFest, but various.
Oh, that's right,
because
he does meetup groups and all kinds of, and then he travels.
He travels. He helps other people with events, which I know you're.
Which is a good segue right to this. So now let's talk about our hometown in a more current event coming up here October. They got their countdown clock for 49 days, 7 hours, 6 minutes, and 8 seconds.
As of the time of this recording,
exactly. Yeah. So this is a She podcast, and I think they're based out of the Carolinas. At least one of the hosts or co-hosts is, right?
Yeah.
And they're coming to Atlanta for their first ever live event. It's kind of unique in the podcast space. So they're gathering all of the ladies, female podcasters, and unique perspectives, and doing a live event. It's a weekend event, I believe, going Friday through Sunday.
October 11th to 13th. Right. I don't remember the days off the top of my head, but a good calendar will pull that up.
I think the standby for our team's going to show us. Yeah,
there we go.
So they're going to do I guess a Thursday, October 12th kind of reception kickoff, but the main events are Friday all the way through Sunday, and they're doing a full day on Sunday. This is not like a half day. I think they go all the way up until mid afternoon. Kind of thing. So,
and it's multi-track. So at any time there's multiple sessions going on, which is always nice to have in a good multi-day conference to have it multi-track. So of course you want to lean on the virtual ticket when you can, because you can't attend everything. Right. And as you said, Rich, this is a conference created by women for women podcasters, or really anyone that doesn't. Yeah,
men are invited apparently too, but the emphasis.
Sure, yeah. But they're very clear that we're not creating the content for everybody. We're creating the content specifically for women.
And the women's perspective.
And women's perspective, right. And their unique challenges, their unique opportunities. And it's going to be I'm going to be there. I know a handful of guys will be there. Yeah. I've invited our 1,000+ members of Podcast Atlanta to go check it out. And I'm excited because this is Atlanta's first major podcasting conference. This, much like Podcast Movement, started as a Kickstarter. Right now,
they did.
They did.
That's right. They doubled
their goal. Yeah,
wow,
they doubled their goal.
I remember seeing something.
And right now, I think they've got about 450, maybe closer to 500 tickets sold, which is already approaching the very first Podcast Movement. And this is not going to be their first conference. They're already planning out their second one, but of course they want their first one to succeed. As you can tell from their website, they're really calling out all the stops on this.
So, I just kind of stumbled across this online a while back, and I reached out to the co-founders.
Jessica Kofferman, yep.
Yeah, online, and we're connected on LinkedIn. Then I met him in Orlando at the conference. Right. But what do you know about this group? And
well, I know a lot because I run Podcast Atlanta. I'm the godfather. of podcasting in Atlanta.
You need to get that domain name. I love that.
Exactly. So, of course, Jess reached out to me and said, hey, we're going to do She Podcasts in Atlanta. We would love for you guys to be a part, guys and gals, to be a part and thing. And I reached out, I'm like, Jess, come on, you know me.
Yeah.
We met. We've known each other for years.
Bring
we
it
met
on.
at the very first Podcast Movement back in 2014.
Oh, she was there as well?
Yeah, of course.
Where was I? How did I not hear about this?
I don't know. I'm like, Jess, this is me. It's Mark Deal. Let's talk. Let's talk. And I've got my own personal rule. I only like to promote one conference at a time. Although I really couldn't help much with their Kickstarter, not that they needed it. They doubled their goal,
That's
right?
insane, right?
But I was like, the day after Podcast Movement is done, we're going to turn on the faucet and the flow for She Podcast Live. I'm going to be there. I'm inviting our 1,000+ members of Podcast Atlanta.
I mean, how great is that for the Podcast Atlanta group, the Pod Atlanta group, because it's right around the corner from where they're at, right?
Yeah, many times every year for all these conferences that we talked about. We talked about Podcast Movement, we talked about PodFest. They're outside of Atlanta, and people tell me, I would love to go, but.
Yeah, now you know there's no buts now.
That but is, I can't travel, don't want to get a hotel. Now, here we have something on a weekend in Atlanta. Show up.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so before we move on to our next topic, so again, you can check them out at shepodcast.live. There's not a .com in there. Just go to shepodcast.live. You can register. You can check out the schedule. What about their sponsors? I mean, they have a ton of speakers lined up. Very impressive.
They do. And can I share some inside baseball on the show?
100%. Is this a scoop here?
This is a scoop.
Sweet.
This is a scoop, right?
Look for that scoop.
So I said there's about 450, 500 tickets sold. If they hit the 600 ticket mark and go beyond that, they're going to open up another track.
Oh, my gosh.
Which means more speakers, more sessions. And I think we can definitely do it.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a great event. What you see right now on the website is just the minimum of what they're planning right now. I know other sponsors. In fact, I've talked to some of the sponsors at Podcast Movement, and they were hoping that they could get in. There's still some slots there available, but it's going to be a tremendous show. And it builds off the success of Podcast Movement. And, of course, PodFest. One of the founders of PodFest, Chris Kremistos, is helping Jessica with She Podcast Live. So, sure, this may sound a little incestuous, but all these event organizers want each other to succeed.
100%.
And they're helping each other.
Because Katie...
That's right, Katie, Chris's wife.
Yeah. So they are related. Yeah, the last name sounds familiar. Yeah.
That's
she's one of the keynote speakers, yeah. And you hit on something that I've discovered early on in the podcasting space, the podcasting world, is that... I think, I don't know if you would subscribe to this, but I found that environment is different than a lot of other business industries, that there's a lot more collaboration and partnership and synergy. I mean, in some cases you are kind of competing for mind share and, advertising dollars and so forth, but it's not as cutthroat, right?
But not really. Here's the thing. Podcasting is growing. 5 years ago, the domestic ad spend in the podcasting space was less than $100 million. I think it was about $90 million back in 2014. Last year, 2018, it was over $250 million. It's been growing over 50% year over year for the last few years. The truth is, Rich, the pie is growing larger than we can all cut our piece.
Yeah.
And so the best way to serve as many people as possible is through collaboration.
Yeah.
And there's oftentimes, you probably hear this, Rich, I know I've said it many times at Podcast Atlanta, is I don't do that, but I know someone who does. Let me introduce you.
Right.
So we're all like focusing in our areas of expertise while helping others. And that's what I love about the podcasting industry. Like I said, it's been growing faster than, really those of us that are serving the industry can keep up with. And that's why so many more people come in. We've got more conferences. We have more podcasts. It's just, it's growing and growing. And we still have lots of room to grow. There's many ways to make money off a podcast. Ads is just one. Again, we looked last year, there was a little over $250 million spent in domestic podcast advertising. Terrestrial radio, Rich, you probably know this.
Yeah, I was in that space.
Yeah, you were in that space. Yeah, we can tell. We can tell. This is Rich Casanova.
Is it my face or whatever? Yeah. That gives it away. Yeah.
No, it's just a constant repeat, for those just tuning in.
Exactly.
Sorry,
Let's start over again. This is so much fun. Yeah.
A little inside baseball here.
Yeah.
But that's $12 billion a year. So there's still lots of room for podcasting to grow just in the U.S., and it's growing even faster outside the U.S. So, yeah, everyone works together to serve as many people as possible.
Okay, so in our final remaining minutes here, what's interesting, again, with the She Podcast live event happening here in Orlando is the advertiser, the sponsors that they've lined up. I mean, some of the well-known ones, obviously Lipson, Buzzsprout and so forth, Himalaya. But have you heard of PodATL? That's
I have actually.
Oh, yeah?
I know Brent.
That's right. I forget you're the godfather of
I'm the godfather of
podcast.
Yeah. PodATL is a new company. It'll be launching soon. They're actually based here in Atlanta.
Sweet.
And I've got something working with them on the side. So it's nice to see that they're exhibiting here. I think they're going to do their launch at yet another podcasting conference, Not She Podcast Live.
Yeah.
There's so much stuff going on. There's going to be a conference right before She Podcast Live up in the northeast region of the United States. But PodATL, they're producing a service to help guests connect with hosts. And of course, I show people how to find the best shows and how to deliver and how to deliver the best interview possible. So it was just a natural collaboration. And of course, being the godfather of podcasting in Atlanta, they reached out to me.
Don't upset the godfather or whatever. Yeah. Okay. So last topic. Let's talk about outlets of publications about the industry. So let's hit 3 real quick. So these are services that are, some have been around for a while, some are new to the marketplace, that are offering what's happening, what's new in the podcast world. So what do you know about these brands? So podnews.net.
Yeah, I love these guys. They came out a couple of years ago.
Yeah, they've been probably the longest original standards, right?
Yeah, James Criblin. I'm probably pronouncing his last name incorrectly. Forgive me. You're in New Zealand. You're probably not listening.
What's up, James?
But it's an awesome newsletter. You can subscribe. You get the email every day around, I think it's around 7:30, because I'm usually walking my daughter to the bus stop. And the email comes in. It's like, hey, this takes 3 minutes to read, 5 minutes to read. But they really keep their pulse on the industry of podcasting, and they do some investigative journalism. I love that. When he hears trust me, people, there's scandals happening all the time. He goes in, looks in, and really kind of uncovers the truth of what's happening.
Sweet. Yeah. Maybe you put in a word, you can create some scandal or some for Pro Business Channel here in Buckhead or Atlanta. So Pod News, that's podnews.net. Podcast Business Journal. That's a really cool publication. I like that one a lot.
Yeah, I'm less familiar with that. So tell us, what do you think of Podcast Business Journal?
Well, Ed, I think, is the editor. They were there just as an attendee and promoting their journal, but they didn't necessarily have. I didn't see an exhibit or booth there, but they're one of the newer players, not the newest, but probably I'm thinking about a year, give or take. They launched, and we were proud and honored to be a press release on their platform for a new initiative that we have. We'll talk off air, or maybe another podcast, but that's called actually the Podcast World Tour. So we were pretty honored to be in that publication when we announced our tour, and so that was featured. But what I like about podcast is a daily edition comes out, and kind of what's the movers, the shakers, what's happening, the new trends in podcasting. They have some editorial writers and so forth. Just some great content, and it's fairly brief. Like you mentioned with Pod News, you can kind of get the gist of it, and if you want to do a deeper dive, you can certainly jump into that. And let's finish with the more recent entry into the space. So the podcast movement guys have gotten into the space of a publication which they've released now on a regular basis called I think it's just Pod MOV.
Yeah, the Pod Motivation.
PodMov or Pod Movement abbreviation. Right. So have you subscribed to that, or have you checked that out yet? Or I mean, they're early into the space. They kind of just announced it.
Excuse me.
They just released it, I think, like a week or so before their event. But
yeah, they did. And honestly, anyone who wants to be top of mind, it's good to have a podcast, but it's also good to get in people's inbox in a way that people open it and read it. And that's what's great about these news things.
Yeah, because
something else about Podcast Movement is they've got a brand new conference coming in February
that's right,
in LA, Podcast Movement Evolutions.
Yeah. Are you going to that, or
I am not. Not. There's not a lot about it on the website.
Yeah, no, I really found
but Jared has shared some things with me about it. I know the direction they're going with it, and that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Cool. And so pretty much on that topic, from their daily publication to their annual event to their new event, it's just go to podcastmovement.com. So speaking of movement, let's move on to our last segment here. So talk to us all things the podcast guestacademy.com. You kind of gave some teasers a little bit earlier, and you have a promo code for us. So what's the origins of this? And is this where you spend most of your time these days? Or
This is where I spend my fun time these days. Fun time that, helping and serving people. My job, you're a podcast host, right? I'm actually a
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're promoted. One of my roles is that of a podcast director. Companies hire me to produce branded shows for them, not so much to be a host, not so much to be a co-host, not so much to edit it, but really to direct the flow of conversations. And I've been doing this for a number of years, as well as interviewing people on some of my other shows. And I found that some of the best guests are deep subject matter experts in their field, but they give a lousy podcast interview. Yeah. And as you know, I've been in the space for a while. I've talked to a few of my friends, and it's a common problem we as hosts have. And I also know that, as I mentioned before, $250 million advertising has been spent just to get on, say, 5% of a podcast episode. Right. Well, we show people how to leverage that other 95% for free, just using the value of their own time. Now, our platform isn't free. We show you, how to find the best podcast for your message, how to reach out to hosts in a way that's not spammy. Rich, as a host, I'm sure you've probably gotten the horrible PR letters from people like, we'd like to get this person on your show. It's all about, that's not the way to do it.
Just copy and paste, insert name.
Exactly. We show you how to do it, right? And then this is key for me because it's been a pain point for me and my podcasting brethren, how to deliver a great podcast interview in a way that listeners remember and is also actionable. And then, as I've said a few times on the show, how to leverage those podcast interviews for your own book, brand, or business. So you can find out more about it by heading over to podcastguestacademy.com. But if you're listening to this, and Rich, I'm imploring you, don't put this link on your website. You can link to the homepage, but if you go to podcastguestacademy.com/PBC, because we are on the Pro Business Channel here, we're going to do something a little special for you. Instead of offering the lifetime membership, which I think is an exceptional value there, and you can read more about it there, we're offering a monthly. So you can join in monthly. Just like
kind of test the waters and
test the waters,
subscription.
Get through it, and much like Netflix, if you don't use it or not using it, but if you've reached all the goals that you want to reach, you can just cancel with a couple of clicks of your mouse.
Yeah. Okay, so talk to us about what people when they join the Academy. So I'm looking at your website, so it's going to help people discover the right shows, because there are lots of opportunities of podcasting, but if you're in the real estate space or if you're a financial expert, you don't necessarily want to be on the health and fitness show, whatever, right?
Exactly.
Some of those seem kind of obvious, but where do some people kind of miss the mark? And
can I give away free advice right now?
Go.
All right. Well, it's some of the things that we teach inside the Academy, but say you're, for example, you mentioned you're a real estate expert, right? Yeah. I want to find shows that will drive the needle for me as a real estate professional. So I can head to Google, and look for real estate podcasts. That's one thing, and that's where most people stop. But we show you a little further. Look for upstream hurdles, like the problems of moving concerns, or whatever. There's problems that people have before they buy a house, before they select a real estate agent. Look for shows that talk about those problems. You, as a real estate expert, go solve those problems, and then you're top of mind for when they need your services, as well as desired outcome. So Google the desired outcome podcast. Perhaps it's the dream home, how to afford my dream home, how to remodel my dream home. Look for shows like that, and then reach out, get booked, perform a great, memorable interview.
With your coaching and expertise,
Right. Not so much coaching. We've got 50-plus videos.
Yeah, that's what I was going to hit on.
Yeah, we got 50-plus videos. It's not just me. It's a community of other experts, although I'll be honest, I'm on most of the videos because it is my side. But we show you how to do it. There's lots of concierge services that will get people booked on podcasts. They're expensive, and I think, honestly, they get paid to get you on podcasts. Maybe not so much results. Yeah. And it's quite expensive because they're doing all the legwork for you. We're showing you how to do it at a substantially cheaper price.
kind of the DIY, but with intention and direction for somebody that's not how to navigate those waters. Right. I remember the first time I heard that strategy of getting booked on podcast, and as a non-podcaster, as a brand or an entity, your business or whatever your space you're in, to be featured on all these podcasts. And I started doing a little bit research into it, and their premise was, you don't even have to, create your own podcast. Just get on all the other platforms.
Exactly.
And I was kind of like, kind of bummed, because I'm thinking this is a lot of work to create your own podcast.
It is.
It's much funner just to be a guest. You don't have to do any heavy lifting, and yet all the promotion is there. I mean, just being on the Georgia podcast, we're going to take this and repurpose it across 20, 30 some odd platforms. People that haven't heard the Mark Deal story are going to hear about it. We're going to do the production, the editing, obviously the studio, all the equipment.
And I'm going to do nothing.
No,
exactly. I mean, I'll share it obviously with my audiences, so your audience grows a little bit. But yeah, I mean, you're doing.
That's the beauty of being a guest.
It is.
And a lot of people think,
and this is nothing new.
Yeah.
Remember guest blogging? This is just like guest blogging, except on a microphone.
Right.
And the fact is, guest blogs, people didn't always need guest articles written.
Right, yeah.
But the podcast industry thrives on interviews like this.
A lot of them are starving for new guests.
For new guests and great guests.
Yeah. Okay, so let's hit, we have 4 more boxes to go through here on your website. So we hit the guided learning.
We've got lots of boxes. And features
I know,
and things.
yeah. We're only on tab 2, and we're going to run out of time here. But so what I like about your website, it's fairly easy to navigate. You kind of got things that jump off the page that make sense. But the guided learning we talk about, which is really cool, it's a true academy online tutorial. You can go through those at your own pace or whatever, right? I imagine you can kind of fast forward or jump ahead on the topics that you have need of, right? As we mentioned, the expert talks about his live masterminds. What's that all about?
Well, once a month or once every other month, depending on what my travel schedule is, we invite all the members in Podcast Guest Academy to join me live and talk about what questions they have, what's holding them up. Because with 50-plus interviews and half a dozen experts, we cover what we think you need to know, as well as some new trends and some other conversational techniques, tip, tools, tricks, and hacks and tactics and these sorts of things. But people have questions.
Yeah.
This is not a course. This is a live academy that continues to evolve over time. So we invite all of our members to join us live at regular intervals.
Yeah.
There's a countdown timer. You can add it to your calendar, that sort of thing. And then join us live and ask your questions. And one of us, primarily me most of the time, will be on live to answer those for you.
Well, I love that premise, because you go through the courses. A lot of times, if you're new at this, you don't know what questions to ask.
Right.
But you go through the courses, you get probably 90% of your questions, or questions you didn't even think about.
Right.
Now you can attend the live mastermind and kind of a follow-up and say, hey, I watched video number 32 on this topic. Can you fill in the blank on this? Because you can't do a live mastermind and have somebody doesn't have a clue and cover everything. It's overwhelming. As I have a friend that says at that point the sponge is full. It's like I can't give you any more information. So let's talk about the last couple here. Quick wins. So these are mini courses.
Yeah. So some of our courses, like our Anchor flagship course on how to be a guest, that's 36 videos. There's modules and mini modules and all these lessons.
That's a deep dive. That's not just surface level
right.
Wow.
And that's one course. But this Podcast Guest Academy is a combination of all these courses. Quick Wins is something that's designed to get you in, get you out in 15, maybe 20 minutes, just one lesson, one video, one module to say, you come in, you come out of this is what you're going to learn.
Kind of the Cliff's Notes version, whatever, yeah.
Kind of the Cliff Notes version, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we can dive in pretty deep into, say, how to break the fourth wall on a podcast interview in a way that engages the listener. So we'll have a quick win on that complements everything we do in the Academy, but they know, hey, I'm going to watch this, I'm going to learn how to do this particular tactic, and I'm done. That's a quick win.
Well, and if you're a lifetime member, then you can go back as a refresher on those videos, but maybe you just want that quick win, you want to refresh it, you don't need to watch the whole 30 minutes, but you just jump in there and fast forward. And as you mentioned, you're adding new content. And finally, what I like about these, you kind of mentioned a little bit earlier about the live masterminds with the community. So it's a community that get together, and they can offer some insight of what their experience was as being a guest, and takeaways, all that good stuff.
Right, as well as sharing with others on what's a good show to be on. So we've got an active community of about 1,700 people.
Wow.
that are always saying, hey, I would like to be a guest on this type of show, or I just had an interview with this host. He was amazing, and he's looking for more guests that do X, Y, Z. Anybody out there, within our 17, it's not a huge community, but 1,700 people.
That's pretty decent, whatever. Yeah.
Okay, I manage very large communities, so for me,
it's bigger than Pod Atlanta.
Okay, well that's true. Podcast Atlanta is just focused on the Atlanta region, and that's the fastest growing in the world. So I shouldn't really, I guess, be too downplay that. I try to be too modest. Maybe that's what it is. But that way they share with each other, because I can only do so much. And as I said, I'm not a coach. I'm not your PR professional. I'm showing you how to do it. But there are other people that are now starting to learn my methods, my tricks and tools and tactics and the things that other people share, as well as networking. So like as I said before, I was on this show. They're looking for somebody like this. Anybody else, within our community want to jump on this show? I had a great time, and it's a very supportive community.
Well, we had a great time on this podcast, and this brings us to the conclusion of another episode of the Georgia Podcast with Rich Casanova here alongside everybody's favorite podcaster, Mark Deal, the Godfather. We got to work on the Godfather thing.
Godfather
I love that.
Of podcasting in Atlanta.
I love that. Yeah,
that's a long tagline.
It is. Yeah. So, Mark, once again, people would contact you at podcastguestacademy.com, find out everything on there. They can also email you, apparently.
Sure. I love emails.
Okay.
I'm just at mark@PodATL.com.
Cell phone, social security number, PIN digit numbers.
No thanks.
We'll put those in the show notes.
Not today. But
for $1.50, we won't put those in the show notes. Yeah.
I'm in the various social media platforms. So search, Mark Deal.
Yeah.
And pretty much I'm everywhere. I'm the bald guy.
Nice. And I'm catching up with you real quick. All right, guys. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Georgia Podcast. Stay tuned.
On behalf of the Pro Business Channel, we thank you for listening to the Georgia Podcast, featuring the who's who and what's new in Georgia. Made possible in part by Global Podcast Studios, offering podcast studio rentals, production, and distribution. Visit globalpodcaststudios.com. And by our friends at Serendipity Labs, co-working, private offices, and more. True inspiration at work. Learn more at serendipitylabs.com. Join Rich Casanova for the next Georgia Podcast and download on iHeartRadio, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and more.